Carole Chambers is Pharmacy Director of Cancer Services with the Alberta Health Services. She's done a lot of writing with over 50 peer-reviewed articles, publications. She currently serves on the Provincial Advisory Group and the Pan-Canadian Pricing Negotiation Teams dealing with access issues to new oncology agents. I won't read all of that, but she holds a ISOPP fellowship, as well as awarded the Helen McKinnon Award, recognizing her significant contribution to the Institute of Safe Medical Practice in Canada and oncology pharmacy practice. So please join me in welcoming Carole Chambers. All right. Just watch and see how seamless this happens.
Okay.
Because
otherwise, I'm going for tech support.
How was that? Probably less than 10
and then
seconds.
I just go down, right?
And then you just go down there.
Okay, perfect.
Now, there's your pointer if you need that.
Thank you. Much improved. It was seamless. I'm so glad I came into the building early and said, I really want to make sure everything works, right? Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to share with you not a patient pathway, but just a drug pathway, sort of behind the scenes, and take you behind the scenes on a lot of jargon that you might hear. So this is kind of the first 10 years of developing a drug. So we know that there are a lot of drugs out there being developed, but why aren't they actually in clinical practice yet? Because it takes about 10 years to get through all the different phases and, as Laurie said, clinical trials before you find the drug. And not everything that looks possible actually makes it through to actually being marketed. And in Health Canada, we actually use it as a notice of compliance that says Health Canada has deemed that this drug is available for sale to Canadians, that it is safe for them to take. And then we look at the different provinces, because although Health Canada gives a notice of compliance, we really need the provinces, because that's where healthcare resides and the coverage resides. And then we go into providing the sales and hopefully reinvesting into research for more drugs. So it's a circular pattern. In Alberta Health Services, as in any health system, there is what is called drug formulary, and that's looking at listing of the medications that are available, at least from the AHS world, for inpatients. So if you were admitted to any hospital in Alberta, there is one set of formulary drugs that no matter whether you're in Edmonton or Hinton or wherever, that's what is available to Albertans. And that is done through what we call a Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. AHS termed it as Drugs and Therapeutics, but it's where physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and other disciplines all look at evidence to try and make sure that they are not just bringing in drugs for drugs. They want to see how those drugs are going to be used and the evidence that supports their use. And they make the decisions that will enable equitable and sustainable access for medication therapy if you're an inpatient. But I'm going to talk to you today about cancer because a lot of our material is actually in an outpatient setting. We probably led the nation for years with empowering patients to be treated outside of a hospital environment. It's very rare that we have to hospitalize cancer patients for their cancer treatment anymore. Most of those protocols can be actually safely administered at home. And I'm married to an infectious disease physician who would tell you it's much healthier not to be in hospital, unless you absolutely have to be. Agreed. Okay, so this is the Cancer Control Alberta. This is a map that shows you historically all the different regions. Well, the regions are now one big AHS, but our cancer system is still very much part of it. It hasn't really changed in the last decade as to where we have our community cancer network sites and our regional and tertiary centers. So we've tried to geographically put ourselves around the province so that patients can in fact be treated closer to home, because that's where most of their support systems live. So rather than an in-hospital, we have what is called a cancer drug benefit list, and that's actually, we're the only province where the Minister of Health actually approves what drugs are available to cancer patients in the outpatient setting. It's a regulation, and if you don't know how important that is, let me tell you, it's very important. It means it's in regulation. It doesn't matter what you vote. Cancer patients have a drug benefit program in the outpatient setting, irrespective of which political party is in power at the time, which is a really good thing. And that is the list of drugs that are available to cancer patients for the direct treatment of cancer. It came in the 40s and 50s, and it has stood the test of time, but it is a ministerial approval. Most other provinces have designated, other people can make that decision, but not in Alberta. We still have to go up to the minister. And this is just, if you go to the website, you can see it, but it'll be on your slides that you can see. It's a publicly available list. There's no secret. You just have to go find it. And that committee that does that is called the Cancer Drug Evaluation Committee. Again, it's multidisciplinary, just like the one that did for inpatients, but it provides advice directly up to the Minister of Health. So cancer patients have a direct line of recommendation for their outpatient cancer drug treatments, which is really important, I think. And it reviews all the submissions coming to them. And we do look at what's happened over the last decade. There are now national reviews going on, but we still have an Alberta review by our tumor groups and our disciplinary committee before it goes up to the minister. So this is just an overall, I'll show it again, but I'm going to give you some of the background behind some of these titles on here. Ultimately, we go to the Minister of Health, but it's our provincial tumor teams that really push the agenda. They know what they want to have to treat their patients. Yes, they know what's coming out of clinical trial. They know when Health Canada's coming. They know what they've seen in the clinical trials and through their use, and they identify the clinical need. So it's really meant to reflect what our physician expertise is trying to bring to the table, and they bring it up through the cancer drug evaluation. And over the years, we've seen a lot of national groups, the PeakCoder, the PCPA, and the CDIC groups emerge that help feed that system, but we've integrated the national voice into the Alberta space. And I'm going to go through those three, PeakCoder, whatever. So I didn't give you the millions of dollars, but the accountants on your board will agree this is a scary graph. And I've been here since before that graph started. So we now spend, under the minister's approval, we spend in a week what we historically spent in a year on supporting outpatient cancer drug benefit treatments. So we haven't exploded the patients that much. We haven't found all these great new cures and everything else, but the suspending, and this is reflected nationally, internationally, and no matter if I go to Australia or I go to New Zealand or I go to Europe, this is the kind of graph that's happening. And this is a rich research pipeline bringing new drugs to the market, but you can imagine the angst it's causing on trying to make sure it's sustainable and that we can get ahead of it. Hi. If I run over time.
98.
Yeah.
How many millions did the government spend then? And in 2016, how many then? Because you don't really know how many millions that is.
So we're up at about $180 million now. Okay. And when I joined back before then, we were at $4 million a year. It was a compassionate program of government. It's now a big spender of government. And we have grown, if you do your stuff, which the medical director and I have done, is we are double-digit growing every year, and we don't see the end of it. Nothing has slowed it down, nothing has plateaued it. And we don't want to miss the access to the new drugs. So the key driver when we've looked at it, because we've graphed this against the new patient volumes, we've graphed it against Lots of different things. The key driver is the drug costs of the new agents. So when a new agent comes along and it replaces an older one, not for nearly the same price. So the drugs that are dropping off the usage are the low-cost ones. The ones coming on are the high cost. Okay? So PeakCoder was one of those three terms. PeakCoder is a health technology assessment, and the ministers of health across the country said it's a duplication of effort for all of you in each province to be looking at the evidence that's published in, the New England Journal or at the latest ASCO conference or that. This is ridiculous. We should all have a health technology assessment where we look at that same evidence and we make a recommendation, should we consider this for public listing? And so that's where PeakCoder came from. It's the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review. It is a pan-Canadian because it is not the federal government. It's the ministers of health across the provinces who said we want the evidence base to be level and we want to see what that arm's length this group is doing. Most of our clinical expertise, our tumor group leads, sit on those clinical guidance panels that inform this. So it's not a group of people that don't reside in the provinces, it's just they're pulled together to look at the evidence. Then what they came up with was this thing called a Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, because the ministers next decided, well, if we're doing this evaluation across the country, there's got to be a power of all of us negotiating the price of those drugs. So when something comes out of the PeakCoder space and saying it shows clinical benefit, but it's really not cost effective yet, it needs to be negotiated. It moves into this group called the PCPA, and they start negotiating with the manufacturer. So it's to bring increased access for clinically effective and cost-effective drugs, to improve the consistency across the country, because I hate to tell you this, we're a little province. We don't have much negotiating power on our own. When you look at Ontario, that's 10 times our size. Whereas when we do a Canadian bloc to negotiate it, we all benefit. So it really shouldn't matter for a cancer patient where you're located in cancer or in Canada to get a good cost-effective solution. So that's what emerged out of that. And then that's just the process for it. It's not that complicated when you get into it, it just looks it. And then what also emerged, so we got the evidence being reviewed, we've got the costing being negotiated, but if you look at PeakCoder, there's a lot of times that the health technology assessment says it would be really good for the provinces to come to consensus on certain implementation ideas. There really isn't evidence to say yes, no, or maybe, but it would be really good if Ontario listed similarly to how Alberta listed, because Canadians are pretty mobile and they compare across provinces. So this is where the cancer drug funding sustainability came flying in back in 2015. And it formed up this advisory committee through all the cancer agencies. So we have an Alberta cancer control. Ontario has Ontario Cancer Care. Manitoba has Manitoba Cancer Care. And each of those facilities either have boards or senior operating people. So this was formed back in 2016 to look at what was still outstanding as we go to implement these recommendations now from the national level. So they confirm implementation issues, they look at the material, and we go back to the medical people yet again to say, okay, well, what about this that wasn't talked about when you were just doing the one drug portfolio? And then we finalize funding algorithms so that we can assure people that we're not doing things terribly different in each of the provinces. And this just shows you that when they formed and started looking at it, there is just this huge group. And it's exciting because there is a huge group. There is a huge group of drugs under review at any one time at the PeakCoder level. And then it gives an initial recommendation, and then it goes into PCPA negotiations. And then we get a national letter of intent that says we're all going to get this price as we bring it on board. And then we get the provincial funding request. And in Alberta, that goes up to the minister. So there is a time progression for once you think there's a notice of compliance back on that first one, on that first 10 years, then it hits all this stuff in the Canadian system. And this is just showing you what we're doing around the chart that I showed, how we're having this increase in pricing. There's a whole group of people looking at like an affordability threshold, looking at stakeholder engagement. They've had patient support groups across Canada meeting to look at, well, what kind of things do we need to be looking at when we are saying, for instance, one of the questions that was asked at these patient groups was, okay, so what kind of increase in survival would you expect to see as a taxpayer if you're going to pay double for that drug? Any idea what the patient groups came up with? A year. You want to know how many drugs I've had with an extra year of survival with double the cost? So the public is being brought into this to have those discussions about what is our willingness as a society to pay for incremental improvements versus breakthrough improvements. We've had a real-world evidence, and I'm going to share a little project we've been doing, but we're looking at real-world evidence because, yes, we're buying drugs, and yes, I'm a pharmacist, and oh my goodness, my world is drugs. But actually what we're wanting to buy is outcomes. We want patients to live longer and feel better. And if I'm buying a drug that in a clinical trial looks great, but when I start using it in my population, it may or may not work as well, and we don't look at that real-world evidence, then we're kind of not doing our due diligence to say, was this worth the buy? i.e., did I buy a bum car? Think of it that way. You go in, you do all your homework, you get everything done, you buy the car, and then it's half the time in the garage. Well, then maybe the public shouldn't be paying for it, and we shouldn't be selling that false hope to patients, right? We should know that it's going to work as well when we put it on that drug benefit program that it did in the clinical trials that we made the decisions on. Okay, so that's those three terms over here about PeakCoder, PCPA. There's no post-test, by the way. PeakCoder, PCPA, and CDIC. But you can see that Alberta has merged, and those really have only emerged in the last 10 years, to having a lot more collaboration across the provinces, because our ministers of health basically said it's ridiculous that we're not looking at the evidence in a similar fashion. So what happens in the interim while all this is happening? Well, drug manufacturers often create these bridge and compassionate programs in the interim. Once clinical trials have finished and they go into, you know, the Health Canada review for its notice of compliance and they get a marketing ability, but they haven't yet got the public funding, there is a time gap. And so there are a number of different bridge and compassionate programs that emerge where companies like They've got really good buy-in from the clinicians because they've been investigating their drug. They know ultimately it's going to get public funding, but what do they do in the middle? And so a lot of times you'll find these bridging compassionate programs. And it's to give you access outside of a clinical trial before it's publicly funded and you would have to pay the ante up, right? It's not that you can't access the drug once it's got its notice of compliance. It's again, would you want to be paying that price or do you want it to be publicly funded? And I will say 99% of people put those two things together. That even though you can buy the drug in Canada, you want somebody else to be paying for it. And that's how our system has been developed, so that you get public funding. So this was in the New England Journal, it's close to 2 years ago, but oh my God, it still resonates with me. Because every time we're cheering about this new breakthrough drug, there's on everybody's mind, but oh my God, how are we going to afford it? And we keep finding a way because that graph of the thing. I have been under scrutiny by the Auditor General since about 1990. Are we good stewards of the public dollar? What are you doing to make sure that you aren't wasting dollars? Are you sure this new access is required? This is a program that gets a lot of review. And so I haven't hit the ceiling. I thought we would have hit it long ago, but we still are finding ways to access those new drugs. And that's what we want to do. I'm just going to skip through most of this because it's like 17 years old. But bottom line is, don't believe everything you read in the press. The New England Journal, which we believe tells us a lot of good evidence about new drugs, did this review, which was great, about media coverage of new drugs. And it was ridiculously poorly done in the media. 40% didn't report the benefits quantitatively. When they did, 83% reported relative benefits only instead of absolute. They didn't mention potential harm. I think the change in that is, have you ever watched the ads where they're telling you all these nasty side effects to beautiful music and people with their grandkids, and you're going, close your eyes and listen to what they're telling you. It's ridiculously bad side effects. And 30% only mention costs, like who cares, right? So the big thing for me is that don't believe everything you read in the media. If you know anything that goes on in the media, you know it's never quite exactly factual. That's where you go back to your health professional. And I like this one that still holds. The American Society of Clinical Oncology definitely influences us. They're well respected, and they, well ahead of a lot of other people, I think, called it that there needs to be a priority for patient outcomes. And just like I mentioned before, it's not here about buying the drugs. What we're actually buying is the patient outcomes. And that means survival or decreased toxicity and improved quality of life. That's the higher priority for the cancer than the cancer outcomes. The cancer is there, but do you really care as a lab that the cancer responded? If the patient doesn't feel any better, doesn't live any better, gets subjected to more potential side effects, it really doesn't matter. That's not the priority. The priority should be the patient outcomes. And so unless patients live longer or feel better, cancer treatment uses can't be justified. And this other one that was out there was this argument about if anything shows any value, it has to be covered. And that's got a term, it's called vitalistic. But common sense will say that statistically significant, like on the books, because you can maneuver numbers, but their clinically unimportant progress does not get public funding and should not be claimed as a breakthrough to be transformed immediately into the standard of clinical care. And that's the noise we get. Everything that comes out is not a breakthrough. And that's what that health technology at PeakCoder is trying to sift through. What are truly the breakthroughs that need priority for public funding versus what are incremental Me Too's, additional drugs in a class, that kind of stuff. So I put this in to remind me that if you get overwhelmed, you can just stick your head in the sand. You can. I guess that's accountants, right? But this is kind of what I use when I talk to the government and the finance people. They did a really nice job about the different phases in a drug formulary as to how you manage costs. So phase one is managing costs, and I don't think I put it, yeah, I did, okay. So managing costs is something you don't care about, but I care about. Am I buying at the best price? Am I buying in the proper quantities to get the discounts? Am I restricting dispensing so I don't have a lot of wasted drug in patients' home? All that kind of stuff is just managing costs. If we start managing utilization, that's about 1970s when it was looking at the physician prescribing influence on drug costs and looking at drug utilization programs, and are they following the guidelines that they put together. they're not really good at following their own guidelines because whatever. So this is where you see in Blue Cross some things you need prior authorization. That's one way. This is a managed utilization technique. When you get into the phase 3, which is managed therapy, that's where we're looking at care plans and algorithms and how we take a patient, no matter where they enter the system in Alberta, and what their pathway should be. So that's kind of there. And then the last phase to date has been this managing of outcomes. And that's where I think we are spending a lot of time and energy, both nationally and locally, to try and look at those cost-effective patient outcomes. So managing all that upfront phases to the fourth one. Because government is now expecting us to say, so was this value for money investing in this? Like, what did we get? How many Albertans have been treated? How many, lives have been extended? That kind of stuff. And we've got the technology. We just have to start really using it, not just letting it flow through our hands. So I like this one. I don't know if you're a dog person or a cat person, but I do this a lot. I relate to this. So I'm just going to share that last summer we took some summer students and we got a Realworld Evidence grant, because in Alberta they are trying, and Jansen's part of those partners with the University of Alberta, and they're trying to build our capacity to look at real-world evidence. And it's been long enough for the Cougar study in prostate cancer, where we historically, for the most part, we started using abiraterone in the post-docetaxel to increase overall survival. As you probably know, we've moved it ahead of docetaxel, and now we're trying to move it even further. So this was a group of people that we had a cohort before all the other stuff started up, and we thought it would be a really good case for us to work through as a provincial team to look at a retrospective chart and look at what happened to those patients. And just to see if we could actually do it, okay? So we looked at, it was back in 2002 to 2014, we looked at overall survival in that population that had, that matched the clinical trial evidence. And oh my God, this is not usual. In real world, you normally expect to go a little bit down, but our overall survival increase with using that was 17 months. And in the clinical trial on which the drug was funded, it was 14.9 months. So that tells us in our clinicians' hands, we did get the value for what we put to government and the minister for funding this drug. And we're just in the middle of finalizing the draft. It'll go to publication, because whether it was negative or positive, we commit to publishing. So it is a valuable post-docetaxel. I don't think it's used that much anymore in that space, but when we added it, it actually did perform as we expected it to. So that's good. I went ripping through that because I expect questions and I'm not going to delay it, and I speed it up. So sorry.
I'm going to start with one, which is sort of moving back and saying, given that graph from
way back
4 million up to 180, and is that kind of a logarithmic increase sustainable? And I think everybody would say, well, can't be, you know. Is any consideration being given to prevention? Now, I know that I shouldn't be asking this to a prostate cancer group, but I remember what Mark Moyad, those of you who remember him from our 2015 symposium, said anything that is heart healthy is also going to help you in the cancer side, regardless of the cancer. Yep. Now, you know, there's genetics and there's all kinds of other aspects, but there's also lifestyle. And so to what extent, I guess, is the government willing to try and address that sustainability issue in funding by putting some money into saying, okay, listen, we can't continue this. The cost of healthcare is not sustainable. And so are they looking at saying, well, let's try to address lifestyle issues and try to get away at some of the
well, there is a whole division within cancer control around prevention and what strategies would work, because they are firmly entrenched in the idea, as are we all, that if we don't get some prevention, adjusting the baby boomers, we're hooped. So yes, there is investment going on, but by the same token, there has to be evidence, right? Because you know, tamoxifen was investigated as a prevention in breast cancer. It caused more harm than it did good. So you don't want to put that out in the public. I know people can individually purchase it because it's not horrendous. It's about $30 a month. That's not out of range. But honestly, when the evidence was reviewed, it was causing more endometrial cancers than it was preventing breast. So, you know, I don't know that there's become this... well, the one thing I do know, my father died of lung cancer, and he was in a generation that did not know the harm of cigarette smoking. If tobacco came out today, oh my God, it would not be covered. It would not be allowed on the market for the harm it does. It causes harm and does not give much benefit. And so if we could just eliminate smoking, and the cancer system's trying, you know, so the evidence that's coming out in the literature right now is even if you were a smoker and you get cancer, if you stop smoking, you will survive longer than if you just keep smoking thinking, well, it's over now anyway. So there's never a wrong time to stop smoking. It's just bloody hard. So.
Frank?
Yes, a couple of questions, if I may. And I sort of understand, you know, the issue, the problem you guys face in this funding. I suspect that some of that has got to do with just population growth and the provincial population movement. It probably has with new immigrants coming into the province, etc. So, I mean, I think as a taxpayer, what I'm expecting from your organization is that you will evaluate the evidence and make the best decision for us as a collective. But I don't believe that funding should be the prime driver of the program, because unless you have sat and talked to cancer patients that are on their last days or last weeks and understand that they're willing to try just about anything that could potentially help them, it's very, very difficult to say no. And all the cancer patients in this room have dealt with oncologists that have a very defined protocol that they're willing to follow, and often behind the scenes is simply the budget that has been allocated. Some of these drugs being available on private healthcare systems. So, you know, common sense just tells me that, you know, we need somebody to evaluate the evidence, but we also have to have some humanitarian part of this that says that we may not know exactly where the evidence proves right now, but that we're willing to take some risks so that the greater good or the benefit that could be accrued, that we can see it and then move forward. So, I mean, that's more of just a comment, I guess I want to say. But
that's not a question.
Alberta Health Services representative.
Yep.
And I think I could speak for many of these people here. Why is it that my doctor can access my medical records, admissions office can access my medical records, pharmacists can access my medical, at least my drug records, and yet I, as a person who gets a PSA, has to get the PSA done, then book time with my doctor to review my PSA, which just is a number, right? Yep. And that's all they can do, which is then dealt with the oncologist, because the oncologist only wants to see you about once every 6 months. Why can I not access my own public, or my own record, not public, my own record that would avoid all of that cost of physicians having to provide that information? I hope you can take that message back to the minister.
I actually know the answer to that. Yeah. So AHS, Alberta Health Services, has just signed on to a contract for a province-wide information system. That's the new cancer center. The patient portal, which is exactly what you're asking, is coming up in the first wave. So it's going to be it's not the 7th or 9th wave, the patient portal is front and center in the first wave coming up. And for exactly that question that patients expect, and I agree with you, it's just a number, why can't I get that? And I think that's to address that outstanding question. So
I hope you can push it through. And I hope it
I'm not going to be the one pushing it through. I'm on the ride. Like, it's happening.
and I hope it includes our entire record, including all of the...
Well, the interesting thing is, because it's coming up in the first wave, I've pointed it out. You do realize that it's only going to have the information in it of the people who are also coming up at that time. Like, it can't manufacture information if people aren't on the EPIC system. So it's coming. That one is coming, and it isn't just for cancer, it's for all Albertans, which is going to be amazing. Okay.
What's the timeline, Carole? When you say first wave?
The first wave is due in, oh God, what are we, 2007? So I think it's in, I'm going to say 2020. I think it might be 2019, but if I say that and I'm wrong, I'm going to regret it. But it is that first wave, because right now, as of January 22nd, they are taking a huge amount of AHS staff to train on EPIC. Then they are having all these sessions throughout this year for direction and adoption. And then they are building that first version for us. We go into a year of testing, and then the first wave comes up. And every 6 months, there's another wave.
Thank you.
Hi.
There's a slight contradiction that I'm hearing, is that you're working with the other provinces to get drugs, buying drugs that everybody wants.
Yep.
To get buying power, level the playing field. And yet, other provinces are providing drugs for prostate cancer that are not being provided to patients in Alberta. And like radium-223, I'll give that as an example.
Okay.
Ontario gives it to patients under certain conditions, and BC does under certain conditions. And you can't, if I wanted to have it, go to Ontario or go to BC, I'd have to buy it, I'd have to pay for it.
Yep. So I can answer that.
How do you address that? You say that everything has to go up from the recommendations of the oncologist through
Yep.
committees up to the minister.
Yep.
The other provinces have obviously, in my opinion, perhaps done a better job of getting those treatment options made available to patients, rather than where we are on this particular drug in Alberta.
Okay, so the health technology nationally doesn't quite know how to handle certain things. Radiopharmaceuticals is one of them. So radium-223 was not done at a national level, which you can tell by the different provinces. So it's the throwback to the old systems where BC did it, Alberta did it, and Ontario did it, and they looked at the evidence and they made different decisions. So Alberta, because it wasn't going to be national, did a health technology assessment in Alberta, and the recommendation was not to publicly fund. There was a different outcome looking at probably the exact same evidence in the other provinces. And that's why everything is not being caught just yet. And every time they say revert to local, I always cringe, because I know we're going to have different outcomes, because that's our historical place of where we've come from. So that's a good example of what didn't go through a national HTA. Okay? I'm not the Minister of Health, so I'm the messenger.
So why is it that that's never been a national policy for drug when it comes to drugs? Why is the reason?
You know, that we have asked the federal government over and over and over again. He who is the payer calls the shots. And as long as the federal government does not have a cancer program or a cancer fund that they define and transfer to the provinces, which we just gave up. That's how this pan-Canadian stuff got started, because in Canada, health is a provincial decision. And we've lobbied long and hard. It's not outside of the realm of that national lobby for a pharmacare. I'm originally from Manitoba. It didn't matter what disease we got, you had a pharmacare. And it was consistent, and it was based on your taxable income. You might not like it, but that was the system. The national pharmacare has lots of support, but not the political will to move it forward. And we thought, well, we'd carve off orphan diseases or cancer. We haven't been able to get the appetite out of the federal government. So finally, the ministers of health across the provinces went, well, this is ridiculous. Let's do something pan-Canadian.
Okay, we need a new government.
Oh, well, I don't know that they're going to do it either. Okay, just because it is the prostate audience, you've got to realize that you are fortunate, even though you don't think so, that you live in a Western province. Because all of your take-home meds, or you're in hospital, or you're in clinic, if it's for the direct treatment of cancer, it's covered. If you go for, well, if it's on the drug benefit list.
It's not.
Okay, well,
but chronic experimental,
yeah.
And it's been going on for 20 years, and millions of people being cured by that, but it's not covered.
But everything that is on the drug benefit program in Alberta that is going home with patients, if you were in other provinces out east, you would be taking that to your retail drugstore through your drug insurance plan. That's the difference between east and west. And that's where I think the national, oh boy, I can't remember what the patient advocacy group is.
Always exceptions.
Yep, yep. Well, there is, because that drug benefit list is not reflective of everything that has an NOC. It's reflective of what's come through the process to be recommended to the Minister for funding. So.
Mine was recommended and turned down 3 times.
Hi.
Well, hi. Many of us will have private healthcare insurance in one way or another. And so in those instances, and I probably had $50,000 to $100,000 eligible under some form of drug. But I'm not certain if the drug, whatever that might be, if it's not on the formulary, if in fact it could be delivered via, say, Tom Baker Cancer Center.
Okay, so there's 2 parts to that.
Yeah.
Northwest Territories, their cancer program is the payer of last resort. You have to use everything else before you come to them. Alberta, it's first payer. So the moment it's on the public benefit list, the private insurers won't go near it, right? We're the payer of first resort. Now, if you have a drug that your private insurance would cover and your physician at the Tom Baker says, well, I'm willing to do that, we have what is called a case by case, and the physician makes a request to the medical director that he would like to administer this drug to his patient, and his patient has private insurance coverage. So unlike some other provinces, we do allow that under a case by case. What we are starting to find is when we say yes, then the private insurance company says, oh, but we're not going to fund it if it's administered within a public system. And we go, what? You're forcing your patient to go to a private clinic? Okay, okay. We've had probably about 2 a year that have done that. And I don't know what the private insurance companies are thinking, but, you know, we have to, it is a case by case. So that's the other thing in that compassionate access program. A lot of companies will do what are called navigation, that if you've got private insurance and they can help you navigate to get that coverage during the bridging, that's what they're tending to do. Right? Okay. Yeah, okay.
So Carole, just one more question. In the case of bone-targeted agents for patients with metastatic disease, the Alberta Health Guidelines state that they recommend that these patients get bone-targeted agents, yet Alberta is the only province in Canada that won't publicly fund those particular drugs. Any comments on that particular scenario?
Okay, so 2 parts. The guidelines that our tumor groups put out, they feel very honor-bound, are reflective of literature. They don't care about the funding. And this question I get from across Canada, and they go, blah, 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 but it's in your guidelines. And I'm going, yes, it's in our guidelines, but it doesn't mean it's publicly funded. And we've tried to tell them they should put a little asterisk or something there. Bone agents are publicly funded in the province, but it's through Blue Cross or other insurers. Because in Alberta, our program is for the direct treatment of cancer. So the bone agents are very good supportive care. They are absolutely great supportive care. They're going back with evidence in different tumor groups to try and show a treatment benefit. But initially, even through the Cochrane review, is that they said the early trends about adding to survival have not panned out. They're very good for good bone health, but they're not changing the trajectory on the cancer itself. And until we can get that evidence to get it back into this is direct cancer treatment. So there's a lot of drugs we don't cover, okay? So we don't cover things like Megace. Megace is a drug, well, yes we do. We cover Megace for the treatment of breast cancer, but it is on Blue Cross for its use in cachexia or wasting, because that's not just in cancer, that's in HIV patients, that's in a lot of patients. It has dual uses. One is very supportive care, and one is very direct treatment. And that's just how our minister has defined our program. BC, they have a similar mandate, but if it's within the cancer population, they've tended to do line by line from their pharmacare in and said, but it makes more sense for you guys to be doing it, so we'll just fund you line by line outside of your mandate. We tried that with government, they wouldn't bite. So it's not like we don't try, but.
Could you expand? I don't understand the question.
Okay.
I didn't hear it very well.
Okay.
Something about bone care?
Right. So bisphosphonates like zoledronic acid, Zomida, or pamidronate or clodronate, a lot of times in both breast, in multiple myeloma, in prostate, because you want to keep good, strong, healthy bones, and milk doesn't do it. That changed after you were 29. So there are supportive care drugs. That's what they're called, because they don't actually change the disease. They support things like your pain drugs are supportive care. Your bone health are supportive care. Your antiemetics to diminish nausea and vomiting, they are supportive care. And we've gone to government saying, look, if it's part of a protocol, why can't we cover it? They won't bite.
Do they expect a patient to suffer through pain?
No, they expect, and they do it all on new patient teaching for sure, that the first thing you do when you get a diagnosis of cancer is review your own drug plans. And Alberta is one of the few drug provinces that will actually allow you to enroll in Blue Cross with that diagnosis. If you were in Ontario, you could not enroll in Blue Cross once you've got that diagnosis. So that's why at the patient teaching at the very beginning it says this will not cover all your drug costs. Just like a diabetic doesn't have all theirs costed, if you have a heart condition, it's not all covered. It's retail-based drug insurance plans.
But most of us are seniors by the time we have prostate cancer, so that's covered by 80% or something. So these drugs that help your care are covered, but not through Tom Baker. They're covered some other way.
Correct.
So you can get these drugs, but you just have to pay something towards it.
Correct, through your personal drug plans, like as in, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but you have private insurance. I mean, my family's got a Blue Cross plan, like that type of thing.
But the government sets what drugs are available under the seniors plan.
Yeah.
And are these drugs listed and available under the seniors plan that you mentioned?
Yes, yes. Because I knew she was going to ask me that question. I thought it was going to be privately, but okay. I looked it up.
So it's just a question of knowing about them and
Yep.
talking to one's own family doctor.
Yeah, or your oncologist, they order it like crazy.
Oh, so we're not being
It's
denied
just,
it.
it's just, if you have an idea that there's a one-stop shop for all your drug needs, it's not happening. I mean, there's a one-stop shop for your direct cancer treatment drugs, where there's a drug benefit list. I mean, the minister puts it all in different pots of money. We know it all goes up to the minister, but Blue Cross will not cover a cancer direct treatment drug. I mean, if you were to say, well, I'm gonna go buy my Leuprolide, I'm gonna go buy it at retail. You can buy it, but if they submit it to Blue Cross is going to go, nope, you should have gone through the cancer
Yeah, I know,
program.
but the seniors plan is not Blue Cross, it's run by the government.
Yeah,
So we're talking about government plans.
yeah. There's lots of them. There's probably 50 or more of them, and I'm not going to even pretend to know them all.
So we shouldn't
No,
worry too much about that.
no.
I'll take one more question from Steve.
He's had his hand up about 3
And
times.
then I'd ask if you have other questions to come up and see Carole. Steve, go ahead.
I hope this isn't a hornet's nest for you, Carole.
Oh, well, why?
Speaking of supportive care, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on medical marijuana.
Oh, for crying in the sake. Do you know that talk I had about if we knew what we know now about tobacco?
Yes.
Okay, that's my opinion. Which is, there is very limited use for medical marijuana. In my opinion, it's kind of a last resort when you're going to try something. But it's like my pain clinic is saying everybody's demanding it. And I'm going, based on media. Based on media. If you come in demanding stuff from a health care professional and not getting an expert review, I think you have the right to do that. You're independent adults that you're going to buy it. But it's going to get taxed through the roof. It's got all kinds of additional side effects. You know, if you drive under the influence and you kill somebody, oh my God, nobody's going to care that you were a cancer patient on marijuana. You shouldn't have been driving.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, but if the alternative is for pain control, for example, if the alternative is opioids,
Which are great.
for the treatment
Yeah.
of pain, you would think that the side effects of those are at least as bad as medical marijuana.
No.
Well, yeah, you've got addiction, you've got...
You don't have addiction in a cancer patient who needs it for pain control. A cancer patient will never be addicted if they are titrated to the pain relief they need. You are not addicted when you get a drug that is actually dealing with the symptom that you need dealing with. And that is the biggest fallacy out there that concerns cancer patients, that I don't know how we're going to change it. You cannot be addicted if you are titrated to the pain relief you need. If you have teenage kids in your house and they're popping it like crazy and they never needed it, that's the addiction potential.
Well, I think the answer is that if you're titrated to pain relief, then it's under a controlled environment, isn't it?
It's still an
It is-
opioid.
Yeah.
It's still an opioid, regardless of how you take it.
Control.
Yeah.
Other than the black market, yeah, you can buy into the black market, but it's controlled by a doctor. You can get a job.
Yeah, I mean, the World Health Organization has a stepping ladder about pain control, and you don't go to opioids first, but they are definitely a part of it, and that is one of the biggest gaps in our cancer control internationally, is that the access to morphine and other opioids is severely hampered, and people are not getting the pain relief that they should. And so if you think medical marijuana is going to substitute in, I don't think so. I just don't think so. My opinion, which is my opinion. So.
Nice going, Steve.
Yeah, great. You didn't forewarn me about that one.
Carole, thank you very much.
Okay,
Most thought-provoking.
thank you. All right.
Good.